blame because I didn't do it before. I ought to ha' dropped into him when I first heard as he was arter her. It's that as girls like. So, squire, I'm just going again to Lon'on right away." Roger suggested that old Ruggles would of course receive his niece, but as to this John expressed his supreme indifference. The old man was nothing to him. Of course he would like to have the old man's money, but the old man couldn't live for ever, and he supposed that things would come right in time. But this he knew, that he wasn't going to cringe to the old man about his money. When Roger observed that it would be better that Ruby should have some home to which she might at once return, John adverted with a renewed grin to all the substantial comforts of his own house. It seemed to be his idea that on arriving in London he would at once take Ruby away to church and be married to her out of hand. He had thrashed his rival, and what cause could there now be for delay? But before he left the field he made one other speech to the squire. "You ain't a taken it amiss, squire, 'cause he was cousin to yourself?" "Not in the least, Mr. Crumb." "That's coined now. I ain't a done the young man a ha'porth o' harm, and I don't feel no grudge agin him, and when me and Ruby's once spliced I'm darned if I don't give un a bottle of wine the first day as he'll come to Bungay." Roger did not feel himself justified in accepting this invitation on the part of Sir Felix, but he renewed his assurance that he, on his own part, thought that Crumb had behaved well in that matter of the street encounter, and he expressed a strong wish for the immediate and continued happiness of Mr. and Mrs. John Crumb. "Oh, ay, we'll be 'appy, squire," said Crumb as he went exulting out of the field. On the day after this Roger Carbury received a letter which disturbed him very much, and to which he hardly knew whether to return any answer or what answer. It was from Paul Montague, and was written by him but a few hours after he had left his letter for Hetta with his own hands at the door of her mother's house. Paul's letter to Roger was as follows: "My dear Roger, though I know that you have cast me off from you, I cannot write to you in any other way, as any other way would be untrue. You can answer me, of course, as you please, but I do think that you will owe me an answer, as I appeal to you in the name of justice. You know what has taken place between Hetta and myself. She had accepted me, and therefore I am justified in feeling sure that she must have loved me. But she has now quarrelled with me altogether, and has told me that I am never to see her again. Of course I don't mean to put up with this. Who would? You will say that it is no business of yours, but I think that you would not wish that she should be left under a false impression if you could put her right. Somebody has told her the story of Mrs. Hurtle. I suppose it was Felix, and that he had learned it from those people at Islington. But she has been told that which is untrue. Nobody knows, and nobody can know the truth as you do. She supposes that I have willingly been passing my time with Mrs. Hurtle during the last 2 months, although during that very time I have asked for and received the assurance of her love. Now, whether or no I have been to blame about Mrs. Hurtle, as to which nothing at present need be said, it is certainly the truth that her coming to England was not only not desired by me, but was felt by me to be the greatest possible misfortune. But after all that had passed I certainly owed it to her not to neglect her, and this duty was the more incumbent on me as she was a foreigner and unknown to any one. I went down to Lowestoft with her at her request, having named the place to her as one known to myself, and because I could not refuse her so small a favour. You know that it was so, and you know also, as no one else does, that whatever courtesy I have shown to Mrs. Hurtle in England I have been constrained to show her. I appeal to you to let Hetta know that this is true. She had made me understand that not only her mother and brother, but you also, are well acquainted with the story of my acquaintance with Mrs. Hurtle. Neither Lady Carbury nor Sir Felix has ever known anything about it. You, and you only, have known the truth. And now, though at the present you are angry with me, I call upon you to tell Hetta the truth as you know it. You will understand me when I say that I feel that I am being destroyed by a false representation. I think that you, who abhor a falsehood, will see the justice of setting me right, at any rate as far as the truth can do so. I do not want you to say a word for me beyond that. Yours always, Paul Montague. What business is all that of mine? This, of course, was the first feeling produced in Roger's mind by Montague's letter. If Hetta had received any false impression, it had not come from him. He had told no stories against his rival, whether true or false. He had been so scrupulous that he had refused to say a word at all; and if any false impression had been made on Hetta's mind, either by circumstances or by untrue words, had not Montague deserved any evil that might fall upon him? Though every word in Montague's letter might be true, nevertheless in the end no more than justice would be done him, even should he be robbed at last of his mistress under erroneous impressions. The fact that he had once disgraced himself by offering to make Mrs. Hurtle his wife rendered him unworthy of Hetta Carbury. Such at least was Roger Carbury's verdict as he thought over all the circumstances. At any rate it was no business of his to correct these wrong impressions. And yet he was ill at ease as he thought of it all. He did believe that every word in Montague's letter was true, though he had been very indignant when he met Roger and Mrs. Hurtle together on the sands at Lowestoft. He was perfectly convinced that the cause of their coming there had been precisely that which Montague had stated. It took him 2 days to think over all this, 2 days of great discomfort and unhappiness. After all, why should he be a dog in the manger? The girl did not care for him, looked upon him as an old man to be regarded in a fashion altogether different from that in which she regarded Paul Montague. He had let his time for love making go by, and now it behoved him, as a man, to take the world as he found it, and not to lose himself in regrets for a kind of happiness which he could never attain. In such an emergency as this he should do what was fair and honest, without reference to his own feelings. And yet the passion which dominated John Crumb altogether, which made the mealman so intent on the attainment of his object as to render all other things indifferent to him for the time, was equally strong with Roger Carbury. Unfortunately for Roger, strong as his passion was, it was embarrassed by other feelings. It never occurred to Crumb to think whether he was a fit husband for Ruby, or whether Ruby, having a decided preference for another man, could be a fit wife for him. But with Roger there were 1,000 surrounding difficulties to hamper him. John Crumb never doubted for a moment what he should do. He had to get the girl, if possible, and he meant to get her whatever she might cost him. He was always confident, though sometimes perplexed. But Roger had no confidence. He knew that he should never win the game. In his sadder moments he felt that he ought not to win it. The people around him, from old fashion, still called him the young squire. Why, he felt himself at times to be 80 years old, so old that he was unfitted for intercourse with such juvenile spirits as those of his neighbour the bishop, and of his friend Hepworth. Could he by any training bring himself to take her happiness in hand, altogether sacrificing his own? In such a mood as this he did at last answer his enemy's letter, and he answered it as follows: I do not know that I am concerned to meddle in your affairs at all. I have told no tale against you, and I do not know that I have any that I wish to tell in your favour, or that I could so tell if I did wish. I think that you have behaved badly to me, cruelly to Mrs. Hurtle, and disrespectfully to my cousin. Nevertheless, as you appeal to me on a certain point for evidence which I can give, and which you say no one else can give, I do acknowledge that in my opinion Mrs. Hurtle's presence in England has not been in accordance with your wishes, and that you accompanied her to Lowestoft not as her lover, but as an old friend whom you could not neglect. Roger Carbury, Paul Montague, Esquire. You are at liberty to show this letter to Miss Carbury if you please, but if she reads part she should read the whole. There was more perhaps of hostility in this letter than of that spirit of self-sacrifice to which Roger intended to train himself, and so he himself felt after the letter had been dispatched. End of chapter 87.